instead of allowing us to be ourselves, instead of allowing me to be a Seguepan person with my own language, with my own culture, with my own family, they took me there and tried to retrain me into being somebody that I was not, So that was really difficult. It was really traumatizing.
Bev Sellars is a survivor of the St. Joseph's Mission Residential School in British Columbia. She, her mother, and grandmother were among thousands of children forced to go to that facility. It operated for nearly a century, between 1891 and 1981. Yesterday, the Williams Lake First Nation revealed the results of its preliminary investigation at the site. In just one part of the grounds, separate from the cemetery, they found 93 potential burial sites. And a warning, the details are disturbing and could be upsetting for some of our viewers. Willie Sellars is the chief of Williams Lake First Nation. Chief Sellars, thanks so much for joining us today.
No, thank you for having me.
On one hand, it is so important that these stories are finally being heard and believed. On the other hand, it is certainly traumatic, as we know, for people on your First Nation and others to have to tell these stories again and again. So how are you coping with the weight of all of that?
Yeah, the biggest fear that we have as a leadership group, as a staff group, as a team here at WLFN is, the triggers and the trauma that could have and was inflicted from our words spoken yesterday. And as we presented our findings, we needed to make sure that there were health and wellness supports, there were cultural supports, especially in the people's times of need. I really struggled with it myself. You look at finding the balance as a First Nations person. How do you heal as a human? And holding up our culture and our traditions are a big one, but also finding some outlets. I was able to skate on Monday, for example. Yeah. Hockey is a big part of my balance, but it hasn't been easy by any means.
What kind of reaction have you received from people as they hear this information for the first time?
There's been an overwhelming amount of support that continues to flood in. The national chief, former national chief, politicians, First Nations and non-First Nations alike, and just Canadians. And the amount of mail and support that we've been getting has been overwhelming. I'm still hundreds behind on my text messages and on my direct messages on my social media. And that's really encouraging to see that positivity and that support and how Canadians are standing beside us. And we are still getting that hate mail though. We're still getting those disbelievers and those individuals that think we're doing something wrong. And some of it is so just hateful and bizarre. You want to feel discouraged, but it's the minority. And we keep that in mind as we continue to move forward in this journey and in this investigation over at St. Joseph's.
Well, perhaps continuing to talk about it and the details that you revealed, some of them yesterday, will help silence those voices. If we could just talk a little bit about what the technology was able to discover. 93 reflections. 93 is our number, is what you said during the news conference as I was listening yesterday. The potential for human remains in those 93 spots, but 50 of them, they pointed out, were not part of the cemetery at the former residential school site. What was it like to hear that, and what did that signal to you?
It is beyond scary. It's really hard not to get emotional about these discussions. No matter how many times I talk about it, I still feel that hurt in my heart. But the scariest part of our first phase of investigations, we've only done 14 hectares. We still have over 400 hectares to do. And through the interviews that we've been doing, through the research and archival works, our team has identified some very high potential areas that continue to get brought up that I have heard stories about since I was a young child. And, that's alarming to me that, what we've been able to discover after the first phase of investigation, there's going to be consecutive phases. And this is the reality of the legacy of these schools, is that, we're not the first ones to uncover these findings, and we're not going to be the last ones. We're trying to prepare people so that they could cope and they could deal in as healthiest as way as possible. But I mean, it's really hard not to get angry and not to be disgusted and not to, trigger yourselves, and trying to find that balance, has not been easy by any means. And I truly, look to my supporting network around me. I look to my council and our support staff, our cultural staff, to hold me up and hold us up as an organization as we continue to move through this.
And I certainly weigh all of that as even we put these questions together. So again, thank you, and we'll go as far as you feel comfortable with. One word that came up, or a potential next step in this process, is excavation. Is that something you're considering? Because it can be controversial for some as well to consider that.
Yeah, I mean, and exactly. And St. Joseph's Mission is different, has its own set of challenges when we start talking about excavation. St. Joseph's Mission is located just outside the city of Williams Lake, directly in the territory of the Williams Lake First Nation of this Secwepemc Nation. But surrounding Williams Lake are multiple nations, multiple communities whose ancestors went to that school. So, when we start talking about excavation as next steps, it's a more broader discussion that needs to be had. We need to discuss with the Chilcotin Nation, with the Secwepemc Nation, with the Geth Nation, with the Newholk Nation, with the Statliam Nation, how they feel about excavation. How are we going to hold up their ceremony and their tradition when we start, stepping onto this sacred ground? How do the property owners feel about us excavating and going through those next steps? I mean, there's multiple questions that need to be addressed and answered before we can go down that path, but it is the path that we want to go down. And, that's through our first phase. And then as we get into consecutive phases of investigation, it's just more work that's going to need to be done, and more trauma that is inflicted, and more triggers, and more truth that's exposed.
What kind of response have you received from the provincial and federal governments? You mentioned security is paramount to you, 24-hour security at the site, but also help as you continue in these next phases. So what have they offered?
I mean, we've seen overwhelming support from the NDP and Premier Horgan's group. Minister Rankin has been great and supportive and quick to respond. We've seen support from Minister Miller at the federal level. I mean, I've yet to see any correspondence or well wishes from the Prime Minister, but I mean, we are expecting it, and holding us up during these times and making sure that we have any resources that we need as we continue is definitely going to be paramount to getting to the bottom of this. And it doesn't just stop there. I mean, how do we hold these individuals and these entities? How do we hold them accountable? I mean, that's another big one, and another concern that our community continues to raise, and is on our radar, and is going to be amongst our strategy moving forward too.
As people watched and listened to your news conference yesterday, they may have for the first time heard names including Duncan Sticks and Augustine Allen, children who did not survive that school. And I also heard a question, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, from Germany. And I wondered what it means to you to have that kind of international interest, attention, recognition to what happened and what is happening.
It's really hard. I mean, it's not about getting headlines and raising profile, but I mean, that's exactly what happened yesterday. I'm quick to acknowledge that although I am the speaker and the chief of the Williams Lake First Nation, I have this pretty special group, council that's sitting beside me and holding me up, but we also have a lot of capacity here at WLFN that is getting this very important work done. I'd be remiss to not mention them as I continue to get the accolades and the headlines. But I mean, it's not new to us that these stories are coming out. It's getting into the mainstream media now, which is hopefully going to expedite the healing process in this country. You know, as we continue to raise awareness, as we continue to keep the legacy of residential schools in the public eye, they will start educating themselves and educating their children and educating their families moving forward, so that generations from now, we'll hopefully get to that place where we want to be, which is reconciliation.
Chief, I'm glad you have the supports that you mentioned and the outlets to take you through this time. I really appreciate you making time for us today.
No, thank you. And we do appreciate the support and the questions and the concerns. And, we really do appreciate you standing beside us during these very challenging and very hard and traumatic times for not only this region, but this country.
Take care, sir.
Take care as well.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.